online. We're now going to start session 4, which is on fault data, hazard assessment and processes, examples from South America. I'm delighted to introduce the keynote, who will be Carlos Costa, and he will be discussing from geotectonics, faults to SHA in South America, challenges ahead. And this will help to introduce the later talks, which are all based on South America, as we would expect from the session title. Just a couple of announcements before we start. I will be letting the speakers after Carlos Costa, giving them a 1-minute warning, as Francesco did for the previous session. So although we have a longer session for Carlos, Julian, if you can be ready after we finish his talk. There will be a little bit of time at the end of his talk for a couple of questions, but then there will be more time later in the general discussion for the session. So thank you, everyone. And at this point, I invite Carlos Costa to share your screen and hand over to you for the keynote. So thank you very much, Carlos.
Thank you, Joanna. And thank you for the organizers for inviting me. I'm just in the process of sharing. Can everyone see my screen, and can you hear me okay?
We can certainly hear you.
Okay, it's coming. Taking longer, I don't know. Well, hold on.
We can't hear.
But you can't see anything, right? It's all in black?
Yep.
I don't know, something went wrong with trying to share my screen. I'm sorry, never happened this before.
Right.
It's like my computer for some, yeah, I probably tried to leave and reconnect.
Okay,
but,
we'll just have a moment while Carlos leaves the meeting, and then he'll join again so that he can give his keynote speech.
Sorry.
While we're waiting for Carlos to just depart and come back again, I also wanted to note that, as we mentioned yesterday, we are dedicating this workshop to Patience Cowie. As many of you know, she was a pivotal member of forming and some of the earlier pioneers of Fault2SHA. And while we had our workshop yesterday, there was actually a second presentation going on, part of the EGU Campfire series that was also dedicated to Patience Cowie. And those of you who knew her, I think you would probably agree she would find it very funny that there were 2 sessions going on at the same time in her memory. And I think that just emphasizes the influence she had on so many people. We will be sharing after the meeting an email with all the YouTube links and various information about day 3. And we'll also include a link to that campfire session for EGU if any of you would like to see the recording of that as well. Carlos, if you're having difficulty sharing your screen, would you like to send it to us and we could share your slides for you?
I think, John, I think Carlos left the meeting, but he's not still reconnected.
Do we have Julian online?
Sorry, you're talking to me, Jonah?
Okay, as we're having a couple of problems with Carlos, I'm going to ask Julian Garcia Mayordomo, who was due to speak after Carlos, to speak now, and then we'll start the keynote after that. So if I could ask that we go back to our central, to our central slides, and we'll go ahead with Julian, and then we will come back to the keynote when we're able to. So thank you very much, Julian. Floor is yours.
It's okay.
Morning. If I can also ask that we have Anna Maria ready in case we have further problems with connecting Carlos. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, this is the kind of things that usually happen. Actually, it's been surprisingly well so far. Nobody had any kind of problem. Well, okay. Well, I'm gonna present a future research project. I'm gonna just outline it. A project that is gonna be done in the frame of a formal agreement between the Colombian Geological Survey and the Spanish Geological Survey. Next. Next slide, please. Okay, the working area is near the Villavicencio town in Colombia at the border of the Cordillera Oriental. In this area, there are two major tectonic features. One is the Algeciras fault, which is a very prominent strike-slip fault, textural, that runs from the Ecuador border to Villavicencio for about 500 kilometers. Some authors extend the fault further to the south into Ecuador and connect it to the Payatanga fault. If that is affected, then we're talking about a 1,000 kilometers long fault, which is a size comparable to the San Andreas fault. The other feature here is the Guaicaramo thrust system, which is a compressive feature that controls the mountain front between the Cordillera Oriental and the Borde Llanero, or Amazonian Basin, if you prefer, for about 400 kilometers until the border with Venezuela. Well, the working, next slide, please. Thank you. Well, in this area where the Algeciras fault terminates and the Guaicaramo thrust system begins, there's this transfer zone. The Algeciras fault is placed into different branches. Some of them cut across the alluvial farms coming out of Cordillera Oriental. Other branches go across the mountain and connects with the Guaicaramo thrust system. In both areas, we found very conspicuous quaternary deformation that makes this area a target for paleoseismological research. But this is not the main of our study, because what we, next slide, please. what we wanted here to constrain is the earthquakes that happen in this area. They're very strongly felt in Bogotá. Bogotá is 8 million people inhabitants, I think. It's located around 80 to 100 kilometers from this area, and they feel very, very strongly these earthquakes coming from this source. The latest one was last year, actually at Christmas Eve. It was a magnitude 6.0 earthquake, and the strongest one was in 1917, a magnitude 7.0, that it was felt with 8 intensity. Actually, if you press next slide, please, again, that big red dot, there is the 1917 event. This is a map showing the strain rate, the read from GPS, from Monica Arcila. And the other map on the right-hand side shows the focal mechanisms from the GCMT catalog. The red ones are thrusts and the green are strike slip events. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, this is a good area for paleoseismological research. We got major faults, the cutting quaternary deposits, but it's interesting as well because we'll have to face big questions. Like we're going to be working in a distributed fault zone, which is complex.
Sorry, 1 minute left.
Okay, for correlating events, for calculating slip rates, we're going to be searching for ruptures that comprise both faults, the Guaicaramo and the Algeciras faults. And next slide, please. And that's going to be a challenge as well for Fault2SHA modeling, because we'll have to think about different rupture scenarios. There's ruptures comprising only strike slip events, comprising only thrust events, or both events, as we've seen in the world frequently, that we can have both ruptures at the same time for the same event. So we might use the serifs approach, for instance, but we're now we'll try to involve hazard modelers. So if any of you are interested in this area, particularly, you're very welcome to contact us. Another big issue, there are many, but just another one would be the frequency, the timing between events. We'll probably have to build a logic tree to manage all these epistemic uncertainty about interaction between both faults. And well, that's it. That's a very basic outline of what we'd like to do for the next couple of years.
Thank you, Julian.
Thank you
Very much. I'm now going to ask Ana Maria Tobin Lopez to present her presentation, and then after that, if Lawrence Auden, if you could be ready. Thank you very much.
Okay, can you hear me? No?
Yes.
And can you see me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So good afternoon for everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to presenting for all of you some general insights on the seismogenic potential in the Colombian region. Located in the northwestern margin of South America, this region has been subject to diverse geodynamic processes driven by the interaction of oceanic plates towards the South American continent. This long-term interaction has been reshaping the continental margin, where different fault systems accommodate compressional and transpressional deformation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I can't see the next slide. Okay, perfect. So regional seismicity is widely distributed along the northwestern margin of South America, ranging from shallow to deep events up to 300 kilometers, which in the map are color-coded by depth and size scale by magnitudes. So many events concentrate at shallow depths, but also deep earthquakes cluster in slab-like structures beneath the country. And those clusters indicate the activity of a complex subduction system where arc volcanism and crustal fault systems are the major evidence on the surface. We can see that a broad band of seismicity runs from Ecuador to Venezuela through Colombia, showing the approximate extent of the active seismogenic sources in the region. As we know, worldwide seismicity tends to concentrate at plate boundaries. So we consider this Colombian margin like a complex plate boundary where the overriding crust is being currently detached following the South American margin towards northeast. Next, please. So the most recent seismic hazard assessment for the country included two main hypotheses for seismogenic sources, which were combined in logic tree as an input for the calculation of hazard. Many seismogenic sources were considered for both hypotheses, which are based on the available data from the earthquake catalog and the active fault databases. Instrumental seismicity in Colombia has become a great tool for hazard modelers, as it allows the estimation of earthquake parameters for classic PSHA. But however, as more geological and geophysical data along active faults become available, the inclusion of active faults into hazard assessment has turned more relevant through time. Next, please. So the Colombian fault-based model includes a large set of faults that bound and cut the major mountain systems. Fault geometry and rates have been defined after the long efforts from experts in the region, based especially on geological campaigns for mapping faults on the surface. Paleoseismological studies have been conducted near different faults in the region, but however not been included so far for the estimation of crucial earthquake parameters. And also features like the slip rate and the depth of the seismogenic layer can be still a matter of debate, especially when considering recent geodetical and geophysical research for the region. One of the major fault systems in Colombia, which runs from Ecuador to Venezuela and could be part of the structures that bound these northern Andes, is currently lacking of paleoseismological studies. This region, which is shown by a dashed box, corresponds as well to the area highlighted by the previous presentation. Next, please. This fault system exhibits two distinct styles. Next,
1 minute left, thank you.
Okay, right lateral strike slip occurs from Ecuador towards central Colombia, and further north, deep slip is accommodated along a first system that eventually runs up to Venezuela. The seismogenic potential of this transfer zone is relevant, but yet to be studied in more detail. Recently published GPS velocities likely indicate that the northern Andes could be currently moving along these faults at higher rates than previously thought. Additionally, seismogenic depth associated with those structures could exceed the depths are already defined if this fault system behaves like the boundary between the northern Andes and the South American continent. Next slide, please. So the main question is how to implement the available data in PSHA with fault sources, accounting for the wealth and variability of this data. So harmonizing our fault source database would be a key step to put all the recent data in the same language, so we can clearly quantify the critical parameters and uncertainties. Included, for example, studies like INSAR, paleoseismology, or geomorphology to help the identification of fault geometry and cumulative slip. We could also use the available GPS velocity field to derive the seismic moment and earthquake rates on the faults. The implementation of new tools presented earlier in this conference would allow us to test the different rupture scenarios, considering multi-segment ruptures and the connection between different faults in this transfer zone. But most important, it is crucial to be able to sum up the strengths and efforts of different research teams in the Northern Andes, so we can collaborate together to bring the importance of active faults to the working desks for regional seismic hazard assessment. Many thanks for your time and attention.
Thank you very much, Anna. I'm now asking Lawrence Ordin if he can present, and after him we will try and get our keynote going again if possible. Thank you.
Okay. Do you hear me? Do you?
Yes, we hear and see your slides. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. So I'm here to present the results of systematic joint efforts that last for at least 12 years in Ecuador between France, IRD, ISTER, IRSN, and the Instituto Geophysical. I hope one day we will be able to go back to the field, but this project was designed for a long time to unveil active tectonics for PSHA in Ecuador. Next slide, please. In Ecuador, as elsewhere in South America, there's both the subduction and coastal faults that are a threat to the society. But in Ecuador especially, in contrast with Peru, for example, more than 10 magnitude 7 occurred since the 19th century, and we didn't know exactly where was the source, the fault source. So as usual, we looked for active faults in the geology, in the geomorphology, in the catalogs of seismicity, historical seismicity, as well as paleoseismicity, but there was no paleoseismologic trenches available 10 years ago. So after several years, lots of field trips and lots of work as a team, we issued a first revised map, as you can see on the right-hand side, that concours to demonstrate that most of the deformation, the continental deformation, is localized along a major transpressional fault on the eastern side of the country. This CCPP active fault is the boundary of a North Andean sliver that extrude to the north at about 1 centimeter per year. Nonetheless, some internal deformation is observable in the sliver along the blue fault system. Next slide. So, okay. On the field, we have very nice evidences of active deformation, sometimes not even mapped. And we had at first to gather all the geomorphologic evidence of the deformation and then go on the field, select some nice markers, geological markers, sac ponds, glacial markers, or even volcanic markers to date them. So after recognition of both those morphotectonics markers and hydrologics or climatic markers, we were able to delineate most of the active fault trace in Ecuador, and we selected some for trenching. Can you give me the next slide, please? So two emblematic examples in Ecuador. One on the left-hand side is the Payatanga fault system. So thanks to geology and paleoseismology, we demonstrated that there is more or less 3 to 10 millimeter per year of deformation accumulated along the fault, that this fault produced 4 magnitude 7 earthquake in the past 8,000 years. And it's most probably the source of the 1797 earthquake that destroyed Riobamba at the time. Internally in Ecuador, Quito is the capital, and it is sitting on a very large fold and thrust belt that seems to display 2 to 4 millimeter per year of deformation. That's kind of a mystery because it's too much with respect to what's expected from the GPS deformation field. It's also showing some shallow creep identified thanks to INSAR and no major historical earthquakes. So some focus study did spend time in estimating the maximum magnitude earthquake and the depth of the locking for producing any earthquake. And those results are published recently by Judith at the end of her PhD, Judith Marigna. Next slide, please. So as a conclusion, we were able as a team, and despite lacking extensive paleoseismology, to propose a real areal seismic zonation from the seismogenic crustal in slab and interface sources. And what you can see on this map is that there is a lot of hazard driven by the crustal
Hi, Lawrence,
faults.
just 1 minute left, please. Thank you.
Thanks. And that this first approach resulted in low hazard estimates for some area. Geology and geodesy all together can help to document the rapid slip rates and the high seismic potential areas, but still we also have to develop alternative faults and background models that include the faults where we don't have any seismic information. To achieve the final PSHA map, we probably need to pursue our work and provide paleoseismic description of more faults, at least in some very peculiar area where the cities are settled. Next slides, and thanks a lot. Here on this slide, you can see the snake-like pattern in the middle of the Interandine Depression, and it's the Quito Fault and Thrust Belt, so you can imagine that this is a very active tectonic area. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. We're going to try to see if Carlos is able to share his screen. And if that works, we will have that now. And if not, we will continue. So we will try again, Carlos. Oh, fantastic.
Okay.
We see some beautiful pictures. So hopefully.
Okay. This is a critical moment. Let's see what happened. I had a conflict with my PowerPoint, so I put now in the PPS format, and I hope it could work. So sorry for the inconvenience, and thanks for the patience, and also, oh, no, wait, something I think is not the right format.
Put the PowerPoint in full screen, the PDF in full screen.
Oh, hold on. No, because this is a PPS, it's not a PowerPoint, because, hold on. I can catch. Sorry, it's not a.
Otherwise, I can, Carlos, if you wish, well, we wait a little, and otherwise I can just share my screen. I have it.
It's not gonna work because it's a PPS. So I need to go again to my PowerPoint because I can see that the PPS doesn't show correct the format. So let me check it out. And do you see my screen?
We can see it, but there's a delay, I think, because we're still seeing the PPSX. We can see the screen as is here.
Yes, that is not the one I want to show. I'll try to. And now?
Now it is okay.
Okay. Well, computers always fail when in the less expected moment. So I apologize again. So I said, thanks for the organizers for inviting to contribute to this interesting workshop. I would like to try to summarize on what we have achieved on the neotectonic knowledge in South America, and particularly where are we now, and what might be the possible path to put all this information fully at work for seismic hazard assessment. But first, let me know that many of the concepts and ideas and data that I will show now has been recently released in a manuscript, in a paper that we have been sharing with many colleagues all around South America and colleagues from Europe as well. With many of them, we have been sharing experiences and learning together for the last, some cases, 30 years. So most of the things I'm now commenting today, many of them I learned through discussions and visits in different places in South America. So where to start? Let's give a quick outline on the South American neotectonics. Let's talk about our experiences in compiling neotectonic faults or quaternary deformations. And then I would like to refer briefly to the state of the art, which are, I wouldn't say shortcomings, but which would be the limitations that has for seismic hazard requirements this information posed. And the most important thing is which are the challenges ahead and which might be the future directions. So you can imagine that South America exposed a wide variety of morphoclimatic, dynamic, geodynamic, and accordingly morphotectonic settings. I mean, we have from hyper-arid environments to rainforests, from subduction zones to stable continental interiors. So that means that neotectonic structure exposed at surface at completely different or sometimes opposed conditions at surface. We might say in general that the traditional division that we have in the Andes has the northern, central, and southern Andes that really also apply or is functional to describe the neotectonic deformations. And because of the geodynamic settings that South America has nowadays, I'd say that both extremes of South America is dominated by strike-slip tectonics because of plate interactions with the Caribbean here and with the Antarctica and Scotia in the southern tip. And whereas what we call the central Andes is the typical Andean origin, where mountain building is basically driven by subduction. And the main controls on quaternary deformation along the central Andes are basically related to, of course, the previous anisotropies, but mostly on the geometry of the subducting Nazca plate. So, and the continental interiors and the foreland peri-Andean basins are characterized by low strain rates, but doesn't mean that we do not have quaternary deformations there. So I will briefly sketch, and in the benefit of time, I wouldn't stop to explain any characteristic, but in order to systematize the occurrence of neotectonic deformation, we can try to outline main neotectonic domains where I would say the most important two, the one of them is what we call the Andean frontal deformation zone, the one which is facing to the interiors or the foreland basins. This is a long area running from Venezuela almost to Tierra del Fuego and only interrupted here in the flat lap subduction segment. The other one, what Laurence was explaining earlier on the North Andean sliver boundary and the Caribbean coast, is dominated by plate interaction, tectonic scape, and mostly strike-slip tectonic dominance. And as well, in the interiors of the North Andean block, we have many others, quaternary deformation, particularly with dominance of strike-slip movements. If we try to put together in the same bag the Pacific lowlands, the Andean foray arc going from the Peru-Ecuador border, I mean, south of the Gulf of Guayaquil, which is the northern boundary of the Central Andes, down to the southern end of the Central Andes. And we might find there a lot of different tectonic regimes, many important continental or crustal fault sources like the Atacama or the Liquiñe-Ofqui, and now, north of the Arica elbow, we have different kind of tectonic regimes and faults, many of them in close interaction with the subduction process. Whereas in the high Western Cordillera or the high Andes and the Altiplano Puna Plateau, we have quaternary deformations with prevailing normal faulting. In the Eastern Cordillera or the East Inter-Andean zone, we have different kind of tectonic regimes, but prevailing strike, slip, and reverse quaternary deformations. In this broken foreland of the Pampean Ranges in Argentina, we have thick skin thrusting. And in the South America Scotia Plate transform boundary, this is our San Andres of South America. We have an onshore transport boundary, and of course, the other areas which are larger in areas, but with few occurrences of quaternary deformations, or at least documented. We have mostly different tectonic regimes because neotectonic movements is mostly controlled by oil anisotropies. So, which are the main scenarios or the main settings for seismogenic sources in South America? Well, of course, the subduction earthquakes and megathrusts are no doubt the main seismic hazard for South America. However, we know that along this tectonic backbone of South America, which is the Andean Cordillera or the Andean environment, how we say here, we have documented many crustal fault sources. Many of them have been nested, say, historic destructive earthquakes, and we have documented lately the prehistoric record of large earthquake we have ruptured up surface as well. And of course, the South American interior with a less, much lower strain rate, things are completely different and much less studied as well. But we should remember at first that in South America or in the American continent, we have very short historic period. We have most of the crustal sources, most of them have a recurrence interval larger than this historic period. So meaning that as we know, in those circumstances, the geological information plays a very important role in the seismic hazard assessment, because in most of those cases, the last prehistoric earthquake, when it happened, it just found nothing or just a few dwellings. But the next one, when it strikes, might find there cities with several millions of inhabitants. So we have many cities at risk in South America. If we just consider many of the capital towns, let's see Caracas, Bogotá, where some faults have been inventoried, but others we still really don't know what would be the proper seismogenic significance of those structures, if any. But in hazard, we know that the worst hazard is the one which we don't know. So many things should be done in order to improve our knowledge on those things. So in Quito, as Laurence mentioned it yesterday, before, we know that there are many local quaternary active structures which would be even more significant with higher impact on the city risks, even than the subduction earthquakes. La Paz, we know that in what is called El Alto, this is the urban area of La Paz many years ago, but now this is completely, urbanized. So this is the airport here. So we know the fault is still there, but now it's completely, urbanized and meaning that we have a threat there. And people from Chile that always were looking as the subduction earthquake as the main threat, now recently has discovered that in the backyard there's some other threat as well that are studying, and have been making a lot of advance lately on that. So during the last 30 years, we have very, very productive international experiences and efforts in compiling neotectonic structures, quaternary deformations. And the first one was the ILP22 project, and in which we capture a little bit more than 300 structures all through South America. And some years later, in the multi-Andean project, we just restricted to the Andean countries, we inventoried near 600 structures. And in the last experience, we just finished the SARA project, we inventoried a bit more than 1,500 structures. So all of these projects were GIS based with cartography and with parametric attributes of faults. But the first two was mostly based on the fault traces related to geomorphological features, while the last one was the first one when we really start to thinking the seismogenic significances of those neotectonic structures. So these were the products of the ILP22, which were issued like has USGS open file reports for countries in South America, including also Brazil. And so, I'm sorry, I can see. Oh, okay. So what we have achieved after these experiences, I would say that this map, this sketch is the last one, the SARA South American Risk Assessment product. So we have done very good progresses, capturing new faults. In 30 years, we were able to include many other structures with evidences or with suspected evidences of quaternary activity. We have added relevant parameters for source modeling, mostly slip rates, and trying to polish the source geometry. And I would like to highlight that all these projects were community-based efforts, sharing experiences among practitioners all over South America. And this was really very important, not only in very, very learnful experiences, but if we're thinking what I said earlier, that neotectonic structures are a completely different set of menus in order to have a different morphotectonic expressions. Of course, it's not the same content that a colleague working on the Boconó fault might have when trying to map in quaternary deformation than a colleague working in the Northeast Brazil and what that would mean. So trying to build uniform standards for compiling and for mapping took really a big amount of our efforts, and still much on the road, but I think we have doing very good progresses. And I think South America is one of the few regions in the world where we can construct regional maps based on local expertise, and that local expertise has a good networking among them. So I think this is a strength that should be taken into account for future efforts. And also the SARA T2 was the first experience where the geological data feeds the NG model for probabilistic maps. I mean, we call T2 because the SARA project has different layers for feeding the NG model, the seismicity, instrumental, historical, ground motion, tectonic geodesy, and for the first time, at least for open sources, the geological information was included as another data layer for feeding probabilistic calculations. So this last effort is, I think, in my opinion, is a comprehensive state of the art on the existing knowledge, and as well may help us to point out future directions or limitations that they should be fulfilled. So in that sense, from all the structures that we compile, only say 30%, a little bit more of them were in the adequate format to be considered as fault sources for the probabilistic maps. So this is that means that there's a lot of things to do, but in many cases we had to add, of course, a reliability index, because there are few faults that reliability is really good. I mean, I should say that the best known faults of South America are around the North Andean sliver, eastern boundary from Venezuela, mostly in Venezuela, because it's the country who first started this information applied to seismic hazard assessment. But good progress is being doing in Colombia and in Ecuador during the last year, has Laurence and Stefan has explained later. The Central Andes is more challenging. As you see, there's a very outstanding difference in the cartographic representation between the faults in the Northern Andes when you compare with the faults in the Central Andes. I would say the Northern Andes faults are more continuous, more, say, cartographically elegant, whereas the faults in the Central Andes are more widespread. They have no well connected in space. So that makes even not only for cartography, but we will see later that for understanding the seismogenic capability is also not so straightforward. This is a picture that I think we geologists, we should look, because I think we might learn many things, particularly the meaning of our information as data providers, and how that information looks like when a hazard model takes them. So in the left side, we can see what is the probabilistic maps derived from all the information, seismicity, all the information. And this is the map I can construct just plotting the information coming from hazardal faults. So we can see that many strips or dots, I mean, many of the geological data has strong influence or bias in the final results. And I think this is important because in most cases, we as geologists are more concerned on the primary data, and we don't put too much attention on the uncertainty of that data. When we say the slip rate is 2 millimeters per year or 5 millimeters per year, with the data we deliver sometimes don't have the proper uncertainty assessment. So sometimes we see that many geological data can produce significant modifications in the final product. And that's on one side. On the other side, I think the picture on the right is also very clear that the input of hazardal faults is a very important one in order to construct more realistic scenarios on the seismic hazard. So what is missing, or which are the main limitations of this information? Well, most available inventories are derived from the typical or the traditional conception of the geologists of mapping fault traces based on geomorphological features, rather than thinking on the possible fault source geometry, meaning the fault trace, but also the 3D geometry and the kinematic and rates. Meaning we need to put or to train people to have this kind of chip or Googles while looking on the terrain. I mean, trying to understand and to have in mind which kind of meaning the trace you have that surface have in terms of the fault sources. So those data are, of course, very heterogeneous, not only in terms of coverage, in terms of quality. So we have very good data in Venezuela, and we have very good data on some particular faults. But in other cases, we have regions where we have many faults, but most of them has no reliable parameters for this SHA format. Another point that I think is important is that we have very few historical surface rupture. So we don't have many proxies to understand or to relate those parameters with the typical worldwide relationships or empirical relationships. We still need to harmonize the database. I mean, to compare how sleep rates are calculated, to compare how the age of life movement have been determined, and those things. And this is a very important point, the last one. We think that the quaternary active blind faults are poorly known and of course underrepresented. So I'm meaning the frontal deformation zone of the Andes. You remember this strip is related to punctual studies on the Mandallay-Pacua fault in Bolivia, but probably there are many like these faults all around Peru, Ecuador, Colombia. And so all along this area, we just have mostly punctual studies. So where to go from here? I think that we need to pick and to focus on which are the most or the priority faults to be filled, those or the data vacancies should be filled. And of course, I think most of those structures are near urban areas because they are a threat with social impact. We need to bridge the gap between our data and the data or the format that the users require, and particularly trying to provide a more sound analysis on uncertainties, for which I think capacity building is mandatory. We need to train the new generations of geologists or neotectonists. We need to train not only how to capture data, but also to understand how the users models that data and how to make a proper outreach of those data. And so far we have been doing projects compiling. I mean, they were inventory oriented, and perhaps we should think in the future to more target oriented project. I mean, not only to take all the structures, but just to focus in ones which would be more relevant in terms of hazard. And the last point I would like to comment is that we also need to polish or to tune our comprehension of the nature of the surface deformation. What I mean with this, many studies, particularly even those the paleoseismological ones done, always consider that faults or any fault should be primary. But that was the old style. But we know, I mean, Stefan was mentioned before, and there have been very good advances in the last year, that this is not so straightforward. And I just put in some examples here where we have very spectacular fault scars that apparently interacting with deep-seated gravitational phenomena, volcanic collapse, volcanic processes. So maybe we might be overestimating some parameters if we just measure seismic slip or surface rupture length. And on the other hand, if we go to the Central Andes, we might find some features that might lead us to underestimate what might be the meaning of surface deformation. These are the scarps of the 1944 magnitude 7 earthquake, 11 kilometers depth, reverse in Argentina. Not even this, these are multi-event scarps. The co-seismic slip was 40 centimeters, as we can catch in this trench, and probably 60 centimeters later by creep. But as you see, this rupture is really very disappointment for a magnitude 7. So if you plot these parameters in the worldwide empirical relationship, you probably don't get magnitude 7. And even the magnitude, the larger one, the magnitude 7.4, which was a 15, 19 kilometers, no primary surface, no primary eruptoral surface, just left some, I would say, distributed deformation, but distributed or secondary, not in the sense of Yangtze or Takao or other authors that you have the main source and then other secondary faults around. Here, the main source is blind, and if you conduct a paleoseismic trench there without keeping in mind the tectonic setting, you will end up with a fault which has a different tectonic regime than the main source, and you will completely underestimate the real significance of this rupture. So it seems that in some cases Stefan was mentioning before that there are several moderate earthquakes that rupture at surface. Here we might have the case that we have large earthquakes that doesn't rupture, and we wonder which would be the threshold earthquake for surface rupture. Perhaps I'm pretty sure that at least in the flat, in the Pampean flat slab should be for sure about, above magnitude 7 point, even more, 7.5. So one of the reasons we found is this kind of wedge thrusting geometry. When you see that the wedge thrusting here very nicely highlighted by row strata. So the chances for rupturing this thrusted surface is almost none. I mean, it's just probably a very gentle monocline. So sometimes trying to understand the geometry of thrusting, particularly thrust fault, which we know they are the most troublesome. What I'm trying to say with this is that paleoseismic data and derived parameters for empirical relationship is not so straightforward unless you fully understand the tectonic setting. I mean, this is a measure that we all know, but we think that in South America, there are still many things to understand as for this, and particularly to when we put data for seismic hazard assessment. So the main takeaway points, and I'm lost with the time. I don't know how I'm doing, but
you're okay, Carlos. You can finish your slides. Thank you.
Okay. The first reflection is I think that the compilation we have done are a good representation of the current knowledge. I mean, where we are now, but they do not necessarily provide a balanced representation of the seismogenic crustal structures, because probably many important seismogenic sources are missing or are not yet well captured. We know our maps and our parametric data carry important information and structure, but they have been achieved through mostly terrain analysis, mostly fault-related morphology, and we need to change our lenses. We need to upgrade that information, trying to think or to put that in the 3D geometry as for the fault source. This is something that most geologists, particularly the new ones starting in neotectonic enterprises, I think it's very important to be trained, and which might be just probably some path to upgrade the neotectonic data into fault sources databases. Well, first is we should, because the resources are very
2 minutes left, Carlos. Thank you.
Okay, because the resources are not very much, or I would say there are few. So I think it's preferable to focus on specific structures and capacity building. In my case, to properly train or teach how slip rates can be approached, how uncertainty assessment should be addressed, and how the interaction with adjacent disciplines should be conducted. I think it's a good thing to prepare the new generations of geologists and the new data generation. And also I think we should stay regional, because this experiences in the past has shown that interaction with practitioners among many countries have been really give a good difference in favor of compiling good data. And also I also want to stress the last point. I think that we should work in a proper understanding in this in the nature of the surface reformation. I mean, primary ruptures versus sediment, secondary, and so on. And I think that's all. Thank you very much, and sorry again for this accidented presentation.
Thank you so much, Carlos. What I'm going to ask is that any questions for Carlos, please put in the chat and we'll use them in the main question session for this session 4 at the end. So I now ask Joshan if you can present your talk, and over to you. We'll just get the slides ready for you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, John, for introducing me. I'm Jochen Wössner, working with my colleagues and risk management solutions on a seismic hazard and risk model for South America. And here I would like to give you a very short overview of what we're trying to do offshore for the megathrust events on the subduction zones. Next, please. Next slide. We are working on building a seismic hazard and risk model for entire South America, but with a particular focus on Chile and Peru. Here we are looking at the subduction interface, where we want to provide a moment balanced recurrence model for the very largest events. And for the very largest events, I mean talking about events of magnitude 9 and above. We are exploring several ways of doing so, time-dependent and time-independent modeling options. And I think the goal of this exercise and also additional research we're doing is to establish an optimal model to come up with useful hazard rate or recurrence rates for our modeling approach. I focus here on the central Chile segment, which is a very active segment in that region, and want to illustrate how we want to use available data to constrain those models. We have done literature research basically and have found indications for those very large ones, and the latest one being having happened at in 1730. Following what Carvajal et al. Have published in 2017. We're looking at that, which is in the central Chile segment, north of the very largest event that ever was recorded. Next slide, please. And we have also found evidence for more of such events based on paleoseismic evidence from paleo-tsunami studies that has been published in 2015 by Dura et al. What you can see on the right side is sandbed layers in the Quintero Bay, Quintero being located north of Santiago. And they have done measurements on these sandbeds, and they have found horizons of large tsunami events that are displayed here with the horizons F to A. And they have been dating those events with very well-known models that, however, do have large or result in large uncertainties for those Holocene events that have been occurring between 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. You see the available PDFs of the event dates, and so we are trying to use that information together with the 1730 event to estimate or to come up with a logic tree that makes sense to describe the potential ruptures along this subduction zone. Their inference was that there is about a recurrence rate of such events of 500 years, but there is a considerable uncertainty that they have been hypothesizing. We have, next slide please, we have then taken that information and looked at how could the subduction zone actually, or that segment of the subduction zone, organize itself, and what state is that, and which can we use to best describe those states. So, a very simple model is, in a sense, to build a characteristic model where we can use convergence rates, interseismic coupling estimates, the size of the events to come up with recurrence rates. But we can also use Brownian passage time models to see if that can lead to, the expectation, or if that can, if we can use that to better describe what the subduction zone segment is in.
1 minute, Joshan, thank you.
Yes. I think the most interesting one is what I call here branch 2, where we sample inter-event times from these very few data to constrain the parameters of that model, and then use that to estimate the recurrence. I can't go into these details. I'd like to have feedback on that. Next slide, please. And in a sense, for the current model, we are coming up with recurrence statistics of these very large events between 350 to 600 years for time independent events, while the range, looking at the time dependent one, assuming that the 1730 event is the last event provides us more conditional recurrence times that lead to estimates of 400 to 830. We're still working on model combinations, and if we find additional estimates and studies and input to constrain those, we are really happy to collaborate on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now go to our Stella, if you can start your talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to present the quaternary deformation in Mendoza Piedmont at 3250 south latitude. I will update existing information around tectonic study in the area, particularly some recent published work and the PhD of Rafael Tural da Poza, second author of this presentation.
Sorry, Stella, could you speak up a little bit more? You're very quiet. Thank you.
Okay. Here are some pictures of the earthquake of 7.2 in magnitude that hit Mendoza in 1161, that killed the third part of the population and destroyed completely the Mendoza city at that time. Next, please. Next. Next slide, please.
The slide has moved forward.
Okay. Concerning the tectonic environment of the study area, we are in the flat slab segment of the Nazca plate, as Carlos explained. This segment is characterized by a high seismicity hazard. On the left, you can see the epicenter of historical earthquake in the region, Mendoza, San Juan to the north, and on the other side of the Andes, the earthquake occurred in Santiago, the capital city of Chile. Next, please. Well, this region is considered the most seismic hazard area of Argentina, where at least 7 earthquakes with magnitude higher than 7 have been recorded in the past. A displacement of 3 millimeters per year is mentioned by GPS in this region. Even we don't know if this deformation is concentrated along all the active or controlled or in a specific structure of the piedmont. Next, please. Okay, here is the region with the location of the epicenter of more important earthquake recorded in the region, indicated by red dot. And also we can see north-south traces of fault system affecting the Piedmont. From mountain domain to the mountain city, to Mendoza City, where at least 1.5 million people live, we found Melocoton fault zone. To the south, Agua del Pizarro fault zone, it's gave by SAP. In the middle of the Piedmont, we see the Divisadero Largo fault zone. Then La Gloria fault zone near the Mendoza City. And to the north, La Cal fault zone that are related to the historical earthquake in 1861, which picture I showed you in the first slide. The main concern in this area is that urbanization is expanding toward the Piedmont over these fault traces, so seismic vulnerability could increase. Next, please. This is a panoramic view showing Mendoza Piedmont and the active fault system, evidenced by elongated hills close to the city in La Gloria fault system. But also this active fault offset quaternary alluvial fan and can be evidenced also by stream alignment along the mountain front. Below, some picture of this fault where sometimes fault plane is not so evident. In picture C, you can see the Gloria fault putting in contact pliocene deposit with late Pleistocene sediment. Indeed, these Pliocene levels are very vertical due to La Gloria fault. And for example, in the box D, you can see the Divisadero fault evident by a zone area, not exactly by a specific plane fault. Next, please.
1 minute left. Thank you.
Okay, here's some picture of the other fault zone. It's particular Pizarro fault in the south part of the Piedmont. Next, please. Okay, here in this table, we estimate the maximum earthquake magnitude according to the rupture area or the station of the fault, and they fall between 6.5 to 7, and this match very well with the model that we run for this area. Next, please. Analyzing morphometric index, we found that this is a very active volcanic front, but also we found that there is a concentration of deformation in the south part of the Piedmont, evident by a higher value of stream longitudinal gradient in red color in the box, but also by the elongation radius of basins in red color. Next. Also, we try with the SAR technique. We measure vertical displacement of 0.5 millimeters in the south area, and we record some earthquake in this area that seem to be the higher activity zone in the Piedmont. That's all. Thank you for the presence.
Thank you so much, Stella. I now ask Sebastian if you can start your talk. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Joanna. I'd like to introduce you a new methodology to link a group of selected paleo landslide whose origin has been postulated as seismic to the probable seismic sort and seismic event. Next, please. In the south central Andes, large shallow crustal earthquakes are the most accepted mechanisms to explain the genesis of large landslides. This hypothesis is based on the close link between the landslide distribution and the main regional faults, assuming a relationship between the landslide and the active tectonic activity of the local faults. However, earthquakes can generate landslide at long distances, so the active tectonic activity should be independently validated. The study area is located in the Precordillera Argentina between the latitudes 31-33 south. In this segment, The flat subduction between the Nazca Plate and the South American one generates, among other effects, a high rate of deformation along the eastern margin of the Precordillera and a shallow seismic activity related to regional quaternary faults. Besides, in this part of the Precordillera, many landslides have been located, as you can see in the pictures. Next, please. The methodology comprises a set of several methods shown in this flow chart, but due to lack of time, I only explain in detail the last two methods. Basically, after selecting several representative landslides, slope stability analyses were performed in order to verify or reject the need for an external seismic agent to generate the instability. When the need for a seismic agent was suspected, the critical seismic acceleration required to try the landslide was calculated. Next, please. Generally, ground motion prediction equations are used to estimate the peak ground acceleration at a specific distance depending on the location and magnitude of an earthquake. But in this case, we apply them oppositely. The required critical acceleration to turn the slope unstable is known from the slope stability analysis. Therefore, an active fault capable of generating an earthquake magnitude that induces a PGA higher or equals than the critical acceleration at the paleo landslide location could be designated as the possible seismogenic source of the instability. So, with discrete increments in the magnitude value, the distance was calculated, and to carry out this representation, the landslide centroid was projected on the horizontal plane, establishing itself at the center of an hypothetical semisphere. The aim is to find intersecting semispheres with any of the surrounding active faults. If so, it could be designated as the possible seismic source of a paleo earthquake that caused the slope collapse. A valid intersection is defined as the fault plane area delimited by an intersecting semisphere as long as the magnitude value of the semisphere doesn't exceed the maximum expected seismic magnitude of the active fault. Then, on the right, in order to locate and propose potential paleoseismic events which could have caused several slope instabilities, the semispheres generated belonging to the same landslide cluster were merged and intersected with itself, and only the semisphere intersections with the same magnitude value were represented. So, a paleoseismic event of magnitude equal to the intersection values may be postulated for the paleo landslide involved. Next, please. In this area of Precordillera, 5 landslides were modeled. On the left, only the number D60 is shown. In the table, the minimum magnitudes at which there are valid intersections can be seen in bold. So in this case, 3 possible faults could be postulated as the possible seismogenic source of this instability.
Thanks, Sebastian. 1 minute left, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joanna. Looking at all the results of the table, it could be indicated that the Las Peñas and Agua del Jahuel Peñasco faults are the main seismogenic source likely to induce instabilities in this area. And on the right, the results show 5 intersection sets, and part of them are located over the Agua del Jahuel Peñasco fault plane, with minimum magnitude values higher or equals to 6.4 and at depths between 8–10 kilometers. Based on these results and the maximum expected seismic magnitude of the fault, paleoseismic events generating more than one slope instability from the Agua del Jahuel Peñasco fault may be proposed with magnitude equals from 6.4 to 6.54. Next, please, the last one. So the most important conclusions using this methodology are that the first method identified the main seismogenic sources likely to induce instabilities in each analyzed sub-area in the Precordillera. The second method, uses in conjunction with the first one, results in an effective methodology to differentiate and establish the main seismogenic sources in a specific area. And finally, landslides will have to determine paleo earthquakes magnitudes, so they should also be considered in fault hazard assessment. Thanks, Joanna, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And now for the final talk of today, I go to Andres, and after that it will be the question session. So if you have any questions for this session, please put them in the chat for after this talk. I hand over to Andres. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Thank you.
Okay. I want to thank you all, and I will present our work that is called Kinematic Modeling as a tool to refine seismogenic parameters of neotectonic thrust at the Andean orogenic front, southern Precordillera Argentina. Maybe a better way to say is seismogenic capability, but we can fix it later. So next, please. Next. So we are at the southern central Andes, and we are at the zone between the 32 and 33 sublatitude degrees, and it is considered a transfer zone between the northern zone, the Campion flat flap, and the southern subduction normal zone. We are at the Andean eastern foothills of Precordillera and the broken foreland of Sierra Pampeana, particularly at the Las Peñas Glacier range that is near to the Mendoza city. Next. So Stella and Sebastian talk about these issues. So just mention the active mountain building process are mainly located in Precordillera since present times. Next is GPS reflects ongoing shortening is concentrated here. Next. Next. So this is pointed out by shallow crustal seismicity and the concentration of quaternary contractional structures. We have several neotectonic studies have estimated shortening rates of a specific sites. Next. Next, please. Thank you. I think that we have a delay. So at Las Peñas Algeciras range, we have the Andean orogenic front is exposed. We have major thrust that concentrate shortening during quaternary times, and we have several neotectonic studies of quaternary deformation expression at surface, but in-depth geometry is still unknown. Next. So we build kinematically balanced structural sections through surface and subsurface data integration to have a better characterization of the main quaternary active thrust. Next, please. So I will to mention one of our structural data. Just the Las Peñas thrust. We, for example, because we have little time, so Las Peñas thrust has at least 30 kilometers of trace, and we studied his morphologic expression. Next, please. And we take field data about the neogene deformation, about deformation of neogene strata. Next, please. And as we can see, deformation is increased near to the shear zone. And next.
Andres, just 1 minute left. Thank you.
Okay. Then we integrate this data with two seismic interpretations, and we could determine that Las Peñas thrust affect Paleozoic basement rocks. Next, please. Next. This is one of the sections, northern section. Next. Okay. So we have the cross balanced structural sections, and we have to next. So we can go on. Thank you. Next. So there are the 4 sections that we built. On the left, the northern section, and on the right, the southern section. You can see, and in green and blue, we have a basement Paleozoic rocks. Next, please. So our results shows that the shortening decrease to the south, and it is concentrated by an type thrust with significant quaternary activity rate. The tectonic rate in Andean type thrust ranging from 2.6 to 3.2 millimeters years, and Pampean types ranging from 1.4 and 1.1 millimeters years. Next, please. So, kinematic modeling allowed to us to extend the spatial and temporary penetration achieved by surface studies. Our model proposed that the main Andean type thrust detached at 10 kilometers deep and arid and Paleozoic basement rock. These 5 imply larger potential rupture areas and measures the detachment level. The Pampean type faulting shows soluble detachments, but are also linked to Paleozoic basement rocks, and the analysis of 2D seismic lines also allowed to us to recognize them thrust with a morphogenic signature, which could be considered first order seismogenic structures. Sorry for the delay. And next, thank you all. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Andres. I am now going to move to Bruno Pache to collate the questions from this session. And so those of you who have spoken in session 4, please be ready to answer such questions. Thank you, Bruno.
Yes, sure. Thanks, John. Thanks to all and to survive this time. And yes, we have 2 questions for Carlos. The one is from Stefan. And is there a plan for updating the database with the upcoming data studies? And another one is from Paulo Boncho, and if there is any action in countries in South America for displacement hazard in urban areas.
Sorry, should I address through the microphone or through the chat?
Through the microphone.
Yeah.
Okay. To Stefan, I think I have already answered by chat, but I mean, to my knowledge, there are no other regional projects going on after SARA. After SARA was done 2 years ago, to my knowledge, there's no other regional projects for this purpose. And as for Paolo's question, I think there are studies going on, for instance, in the San Ramon Fault in Santiago. Not sure, I mean, how continuous are there, or how interactions are. I wonder if Felipe is still in the room. He can probably give more precise answers. I know that Quito has been under very good studies from people from Ecuador, and also the group of Florence and Stefan. In Bogotá as well, I think there are studies or at least plans to address these faults. Caracas, I know that the faults have been already studied many years ago. What I can refer is there are probably individual studies, but one thing that should be reinforced in South America is to individualize institutions who have the missions to, to develop a seismic hazard assessment. This is something that should be reinforced, because without any specific institutional missions, these things will probably never happen.
Okay, thanks, Carlos. And yes, we have some question for Sebastian. And yes, one from Julian is about the uncertainties in the PGA GMPs, but also for Jomar, also question if they tried to use different parameters like PGV or in areas intensity, and to obtain different results or not.
No, we didn't. We just only use the PGA parameter, and that's the result we had. But that would be a nice thing to do in future calculations. That's all. We didn't use them.
Okay, and also a question for Jochen. If you tried or not to use different distribution apart from Brownian passage time.
Yeah, we are exploring a variety of these models, but for what we have as a conceptual model, in our mind, we find that at the moment we are favoring the Brownian passage time based models and combinations of those, with Bayesian updates or other, combinations in a sense, as I said, in a logic tree. So that's why I've been showing this in the talk.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand very well the question. If you can write down in the chat box, I think it would be better. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it was not for you, the question.
Okay, sorry.
Okay. Okay, I think we finished with the main questions, because the other were the details answered through the chat, and I think we are all tired, and so I ask Joanna and Francesco just to close the second day.
Thank you so much to everyone who participated, both all of you who spoke and also those of you who are asking interesting questions. Fault2SHA really is a community effort, and we want to keep these conversations going. So I do hope as many of you as possible can join us on the 2nd of December, on Wednesday, the 2nd of December, where we will have an open discussion, and we will be sending an email about that. Also a reminder that almost all the talks are available on YouTube. So please go to our channel if you want to watch any of those talks again, or if you did miss any. I do have some really important thank yous to make after these first 2 days. Particularly thank you to all the XCOM who helped organize this session, and to Claudia Sergambato and Xiaoong Wang, who have been working behind the scenes, sorting out all the slides. They really have been concentrating very hard all the way through. So a big thank you to them. And then also my other behind the scene helpers, particularly Francesco Vicini and Bruno, who you've been seeing have been doing questions and chairing sessions, and also Laura Peruzzo and Una Scotti, who have been working away behind the scenes, doing more than you will know. So thank you so much, everybody, and see you on Wednesday, the 2nd of December.
Bye, thank you.